I remember the first time I wandered deep into the forest alone, just past twilight, when the fog began to settle like a quiet breath over the pine needles. The world felt still, almost suspended, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the soft hum of distant water. My lantern flickered, casting long shadows that danced like half-formed figures, and I could almost hear whispers riding on the mist. Each step I took felt heavier, the silence pressing closer, as though the forest itself were breathing around me. I should have turned back when I saw the first set of footprints in the dirt, strange, uneven, and impossibly long. But something kept me moving, a curiosity I couldn't quiet. That's when I saw it. Late evening settles over the forest, as if the sky is taking a slow breath. A pale light slips through the branches, thin and cold, the way winter feels before it fully arrives. I walk deeper into whispering pines, boots sinking gently into soft earth, pine needles brushing my ankles like something trying to follow. The air is cool enough to sting, and every inhale tastes of moss and old bark. There's a hum beneath it all, low and steady, like the ground is keeping a secret. I pause. Listen. The trees stand in rows around me, thick trunks rising like dark pillars, each one older than anything I know. Their shadows slide over the forest floor, long, thin, stretching in directions that feel wrong for the fading light behind me. A rustling moves across the canopy. Not sharp, not sudden, just a soft shift, as their branches are leaning closer, trying to hear me breathe. I pull my jacket tighter. My fingers feel cold, even though the air isn't that harsh. There's a faint voice in the wind. Not words, just something shaped like them, thin and broken like static drifting between trees. It brushes my ear and my chest tightens. I look around, but the forest stays still. Only the tall pines, their needles trembling gently, as though something just ran a hand across them. I tell myself it's just a breeze, just the forest settling into night. But the hum grows thicker, pushing into the quiet, following the beat of my pulse. The path narrows. Dust rises with each step, mixing with the smell of sap and damp leaves. My footsteps sound too soft, like the ground is swallowing them before they can echo. Another voice glides past me, this one lower, like someone whispering through cupped hands. It moves around my neck and fades as quickly as it came, leaving only a cold trail against my skin. I try to breathe steady. The fog is starting to gather, thin at first, as if rising from cracks in the soil. It drifts between the trees, curling around my legs, making the air feel heavier. The forest hum deepens, a vibration, almost a pulse. I take another step, and the shadows shift. They stretch longer, pulling across the bark in long, crooked shapes that look almost like arms, almost like figures trying to crawl out from the trunks themselves. My breath shakes. I blink hard, but they're still there, dark bodies clinging to pines, heads tilted, limbs slim and stretched like silhouettes pressed into wood. The fog rises higher. I can feel it on my wrists, cool and damp, wrapping around me like slow-moving water. Somewhere above me, a branch cracks, soft, almost gentle, as if something stepped on it with careful weight. I don't look up. I don't want to. The hum in the ground fades into a hush, a silence, so complete I can hear my heartbeat thudding against my ribs. The forest holds its breath with me, waiting, listening. Then a whisper, close, right beside me. A thin voice, barely formed, as light as the fog curling around my knees. I turn slowly. Nothing there, just a pale mist and the long shadows leaning toward me like they're curious. I take a step back. The fog moves too, following, thickening around my ankles with every inch I retreat. My hand brushes a pine trunk. The bark is cold, colder than it should be, and it feels like it's breathing, tiny slow movements beneath the surface, like something is shifting inside it. The voices rise again. Not loud, but many, a soft blend of broken murmurs, like people speaking through sleep. They swirl through the fog, circling my legs, my arms, the back of my neck. I close my eyes for a moment. I shouldn't, but I do. And the whispers slide deeper, as if leaning close to press their words into my skin. I open my eyes. The shadows on the trees aren't still anymore. They sway, slowly, in a rhythm that doesn't match the wind. Thin arms stretching, curling, quietly reaching as the fog thickens around them. A shape shifts behind the nearest trunk. Not a figure. Not fully, just a darker patch in the darkness, moving with slow, deliberate steps that make the fog tremble. My breath catches. The hum returns, stronger this time, shaking lightly beneath my feet as if the earth is warning me. The whispers gather in one wave, rising around my ears, filling the silence until it feels like the forest is trying to speak through a single breath. I don't wait to understand it. I step back again, hands shaking, fog clinging to my clothes like it doesn't want to let go. One last whisper curls against my cheek, so soft it feels like a fingertip. I freeze. My heart stutters. The forest grows quiet, completely, and in that stillness, I finally understand I am not alone in these trees. And whatever is here has been waiting for me to hear it, waiting for me to feel its breath, waiting in the fog as the shadows lean closer and the night folds in around my fear. Night settles thicker around me as the forest grows darker, a cold quiet stretching between each tree. The fog hangs low to the ground, trailing around roots and fallen needles like it's searching for a place to hide. I lift my lantern. Its pale light trembles against the air, a soft glow wrapped in glass. Warm in my hand, yet barely strong enough to push the darkness back. I stand still for a moment, breath slow, heart steady, listening to the faint hum under the soil. The lantern flickers. A small pulse, like a heartbeat trapped inside the flame. It glows bright, then dims until the trees fade into silhouettes. I raise it higher. My arm feels cold, the skin tight with faint static that lifts strands of my hair, as though the air itself is reaching for me. Another flicker, a skip of light. The shadows move with it, stretching close, then rushing back into the dark as the lantern steadies again. For a second, just a second, I see something crouched along the edge of the light. Low, still, tilted slightly, like it was waiting for the lantern to go dark. I blink. The shape is gone. Only the dense fog remains, pressing cool air against my shins. I swallow hard, step forward. The fallen leaves crunch softly, muted by the mist curling around my boots. The light pulses again. Once, twice. Each time, the shadows ripple heavier, as if the forest is moving in time with the lantern. A faint rustling drifts between the pines, dry needles brushing together, branches swaying without wind. It feels like something is circling, not close enough to see, but close enough to know. The lantern shivers in my grip, a tiny vibration, like it doesn't want to be here either. I lift it closer to my chest. The flame sways, a thin line of pale gold struggling against the dark that presses in on all sides. Another flicker. The darkness expands suddenly, dense and heavy, and for a heartbeat the light almost vanishes. In that brief dimness, I see movement, shapes sliding between the trunks, too quick, too smooth, crouching, rising, sinking back again as if they're trying not to be caught fully in the lantern's glow. My breath fogs the air. The warmth of it feels strange against the cold, creeping down my spine. The flame steadies. Everything freezes. Silence falls so sharply it feels like the woods are holding themselves still, watching, waiting. I step again. A careful movement. Slow enough to hear the faint hum under my feet grow louder with pressure. The lantern flickers in response. The pale light jumps, then swells, casting long shadows that shiver across the pines. At the edge of my vision, something leans out, just enough to have shape, just enough to feel real, a curved outline, low to the ground, arms pressed close to its sides as though it's bracing to spring or to hide. My throat tightens. I shift the lantern toward it. But the shape pulls back, melting into the darker layer of fog that clings to the forest floor. Static brushes my cheek, light as breath, a soft lift of my hair, as if fingers slid just an inch too near. I whisper out a slow exhale. The cold mixes with the warmth of it, stirring the mist around my face in quiet swirls. The lantern dims again, and again, a slow, throbbing rhythm like it's losing strength. Shapes return with each dimming, not clear enough to understand, but close enough to sense their presence crowding the edges of the light. Crouching low, waiting for the next moment, the flame dips. My fingers tremble on the handle. The metal feels colder now, as if the lantern has been touched by the same thing that's moving in the dark. I pause. Let the silence press against me. Let the fog wrap around my ankles. The forest seems to lean in, branches angle like listening ears. The hum in the soil grows faint, then stops entirely. A soft shift near my left. I turn the lantern slowly, careful not to break the quiet. Its glow washes over a patch of fog, and for a breath something is there. Bent, still, almost human in shape, but wrong in the way its shadow bends. The flame flares bright in my palm, and the shape folds back into the dark as if it had never been there at all. The air thickens with static. It prickles along my arms, raising goosebumps as if the forest is brushing against me. I swallow again, the dryness in my mouth sharp against the damp scent of pine. The lantern steadies one more time. The light soft and trembling, but whole. The shapes pull back, sliding into the gaps between trees where the darkness hides them completely. The forest stays silent, listening, breathing slow around me. I take a final step, lantern held close, fog shifting at my knees. A question lingers in the back of my mind, quiet and unwelcome. Am I watching the forest, or is the forest watching me? The light flickers once more like a blink in the dark. Night settles deeper over the woods, pressing cool air against my skin as the trees close in around the narrow path. The fog clings low, curling around my ankles, soft and cold like damp breath rising from the earth. My lantern glows faintly in my hand, its pale light floating in the mist like it's unsure if it belongs here. The forest smells of wet bark and moss, thick and old, as though it hasn't moved in years. I walk slowly, my footsteps muffled by the layer of leaves wrapped in mist. For a while, it's just the steady rhythm of my breathing and the faint hum beneath the soil that seems to follow every step. Then, a crunch, soft, behind me. I stop. The sound stops. The fog shifts around my legs, cooling my skin, making me feel suddenly exposed. I turn my head slightly, lantern raised, letting its trembling light spill through the trees. Nothing moves, only the long shadows, stretching thin between the trunks like lines drawn by an unsteady hand. I breathe out slow. The air leaves my lips in a pale cloud, mixing with the fog as if the forest is taking it from me. I take another step. The leaves whisper under my boot. Then a second step behind me, matching mine. Deliberate, slow, too slow to be an echo. I freeze. The forest freezes with me. A silence falls so heavy it presses against my ears, damp and thick, like cotton soaked in cold water. My heart taps against my ribs in a rhythm I can feel in my fingers. I listen. No breath but my own. No wind. Only the quiet weight of something waiting just out of sight. The fog thickens, rising around my knees now, wrapping my legs like soft hands trying to pull me deeper. I turn again, slowly, carefully, the lantern's glow shaking across the dark. Nothing, just the mist curling in slow spirals as though disturbed by a movement I missed. I swallow. The dryness in my throat feels strange against the damp air pressing against my face. I step forward once more. A careful step, barely grazing the leaves. Behind me, a faint crunch. My chest tightens. I stop. It stops. The presence sits there in the quiet, too close, too still. I feel in the way the hairs rise on my neck, in the faint brush of cold against my shoulder, like someone exhaled just an inch away. The lantern flickers, a weak heartbeat of light, and the shadows around me grow longer, leaning in, stretching across the fog. I whisper my breath out slowly, trying not to shake. The rustling begins, soft, almost thoughtful, leaves being pressed aside, shifted in a slow pattern that feels intentional. I turn my body fully, lantern lifted high, pale light pushing through the fog in a trembling circle. Still nothing, just the mist moving like it has its own pulse. The footsteps stay quiet now, but the feeling doesn't. A presence. Close. Hovering just behind a veil of white. I try to focus on the trees. Tall. Silent. Their bark slick with damp. Their branches heavy with fog. Drooping low like tired arms. The air smells sharper here, like wet stone and old soil. A shiver runs down my spine, slow and deliberate, matching the rhythm of those hidden steps. I take another step forward, forcing myself to move. My foot sinks into soft ground. Then, behind me, the crunch returns, louder this time, close enough that I feel the faint tremble of it through the fog at my back. I don't turn right away. I let the silence settle again, thick and uneasy. My breath gathers at the edge of a sigh I never let out. I turn slowly. The lantern casts a weak glow that seems swallowed by the fog before it even leaves the glass. The mist curls, shifts, thins, as if something just moved through it. My pulse flickers in my throat. My grip tightens on the lantern's handle until the metal digs into my fingers. But there is nothing, no shape, no shadow separate from the rest. Only the quiet weight of a presence that refuses to show itself. The fog rises higher, brushing my waist, making it hard to tell where the ground even is anymore. Everything feels distant, blurred at the edges, like the forest is pulling itself apart and stitching it back together around me. The footsteps fade. Not gone, just blended into the silence so perfectly that I can't tell if they're waiting or moving without sound now. The hum beneath the soil disappears. The air stops shifting. Even the trees seem to hold still, as if they're trying not to disturb whatever stand behind me in that thick white fog. I stand there, wrapped in cold mist and quiet, feeling the presence settle deeper into the space around me. Not touching, not speaking. Just there, close enough to sense, close enough to fear. The forest grows silent in a way that feels final, as if everything has agreed to hold its breath with me. And in that heavy, uneasy quiet, I realize I'm no longer walking alone. Something is following, and it's waiting in the fog. The night air turns colder as I step deeper into the forest, the fog drifting higher until it brushes against my waist like slow-moving breath. My lantern hangs low in my hand, its pale light trembling in the thick dark between the trees. The flame whispers against the glass, soft and restless, as if it senses something before I do. The scent of damp pine clings to every inhale, cold and earthy, leaving a heavy taste on my tongue. I move slowly, careful steps. The leaves beneath my boots crush into a hushed rustle that fades almost instantly into the fog. The forest feels different tonight, closer, like the trunks themselves are leaning inward to watch me pass. A faint hum pulses in the soil, barely there, but steady enough to crawl up my spine. I lift the lantern a little higher, letting the pale glow spill over the underbrush. That's when I see them. Two small glints, pale, round, reflective against the dark bramble. Eyes, staring back at me from the tangle of ferns and low branches. I stop. The lantern trembles in my grip. The eyes do not move, do not blink. Just watch, still as stars pinned to the forest floor. My breath thins in my chest, caught between rising and falling. The fog tightens around my legs, cool and damp, like it's trying to hold me still. I take one quiet inhale. The eyes blink, both at once, slow, perfectly in sync. A shiver runs through my arms, making the lantern's light ripple across the branches. The eyes blink again and vanish. Gone so quickly it feels like they were never there at all. The underbrush settles back into shadow, soft and unbroken, as if nothing had been watching from just a few steps away. I swallow, but my throat feels tight, dry against the cold air. I turn a little, casting the lantern's glow across the trees behind me. Every trunk stands tall and silent, lined in rows that stretch too far into the dark. But the forest feels awake now, more than before, more than it should be. Its presence presses around me, thick and unblinking, as if thousands of eyes have opened just beyond the reach of the light. The lantern flickers, a soft pulse, then another. Each dimming makes the shadows swell, stretching long fingers across the fog. A rustling stirs to my left, low, slow, like something shifting its weight in the darkness. I aim the lantern that way. The light rolls over brambles, wet leaves, a fallen log. Then another pair of eyes, farther this time, higher off the ground. They watch me without a single quiver or twitch. The forest closes in. Branches overhead sway slightly, though no wind moves through them. Their needles whisper together like they're discussing me in hushed tones. I try to steady my breathing, but every inhale feels thin, as if the forest is taking more air than I am. The eyes blink again, a slow dip of pale light reflecting back at me. Then from the right, 2 more glints appear, lower, closer, blinking in perfect rhythm with the others. My skin prickles with static, hair lifting gently as though brushed by invisible fingertips. I step back. The fog shifts with me, parting in soft ribbons that curl around my boots. The eyes vanish again, all at once, leaving nothing but darkness and the uneasy hum settling into my bones. I scan the tree line, lantern trembling more now, its flame flicking like a nervous pulse. But the forest has closed its gaze. No eyes, no shapes, just the quiet weight of something unseen watching from every direction. I feel it in the stillness, in the heavy calm that replaces the rustling, in the way the fog seems to slow my steps, as if urging me to stay just a moment longer. I move forward anyway, each step soft, each breath thin and careful. The trees arch over me, their shadows long and bending, swaying without reason as though something beneath them is shifting quietly. I keep the lantern close to my chest. Its light warms my fingers, but does nothing to ease the chill climbing up my arms. The silence deepens, thick, dense, so quiet that even my heartbeat feels too loud. Somewhere behind the layers of fog, I imagine the eyes watching still, open, unblinking, following every step from just outside the pale ring of light. I don't look back. I don't want to. The quiet dread settles in my stomach, heavy and patient, as the forest breathes around me with slow, silent intent. The path fades into mist ahead, and I walk into it, alone, but never unseen. The path dipped lower as evening cooled around me, and the late autumn light slipped between the trees in thin, pale bands. Cold air pressed against my cheeks. Every breath drifted in front of me, soft and white. I remember the forest growing quieter the farther I walked. Even the rustling leaves felt distant, like they were holding their breath with me. The fog moved low across the ground, curling around my boots, pulling me deeper into a place that felt older than the trail itself. I kept thinking I should turn back, but the silence guided me forward, a slow hum under the trees, a weight behind every step. That's when I saw it, a cabin, small, barely holding itself together. The roof sagged under a layer of moss. The windows were smudged with dirt and something darker, and the front door, slightly open, just enough for the pale light to spill out across the porch. I stopped at the edge of the clearing. Cold air brushed the back of my neck, like a warning, like a breath that didn't belong to me. Still, I moved closer, each soft footstep sinking into the wet soil. The cabin didn't look abandoned the way old places usually do. It looked paused, like someone had stepped out only moments before. A thin scent drifted through the open doorway. Smoke, and under it, decay, sweet and rotten. Something that clung to the back of my throat. I whispered to myself, barely letting the words slip out. Someone was here, but the forest didn't answer. It only grew heavier around me. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers. The hinges barely moved, but the wooden slab groaned as if waking from a long sleep. Inside, the air hit me all at once, cold and stale, but carrying a soft heat from something burned out long ago. The cabin was one room. A table, a chair tipped on its side, a pile of blankets in the corner, and shadows stretching across every wall, moving like slow water. My breath froze halfway in my chest. The shadows weren't still. They bent, shifted, as if something walked behind the walls themselves. I stepped inside anyway. The floorboards bowed beneath my weight. A low creak slid beneath my feet, echoing softly through the room. The pale light from outside thinned into a dull gray here. It brushed the dust along the table, the long scratch marks across the wood, and the faint shape of a handprint smeared near the doorframe. I didn't want to look at it too long. Something in me tightened when I did. A cold draft swept across my back, lifting the tiny hairs on my arms. It carried the scent again, smoke and that slow, sinking decay. I felt watched, not by the forest anymore, by something closer. Inside, My eyes drifted to the far corner, the one place the light didn't reach. A patch of darkness thicker than the rest. I told myself it was nothing, just the way the cabin leaned, just a lack of light. But the shadow there, it pulled at my attention, like it wanted me to look deeper, to notice the shape hiding inside it. There was a moment, quiet, thin, like the world hesitated. Then something shifted, soft, a scrape across the wooden floor, like bare skin dragging just an inch. My breath shook in my chest. I stood perfectly still, the cold air brushing my ankles, my fingers trembling at my sides. The shadow leaned, just slightly, as if it were adjusting its weight, as if it stood upright in the dark. I couldn't see a face, but I felt eyes, wide, patient, following every small movement I made. The cabin seemed close around me, the walls inching forward, the air thickening until every breath felt too loud. I whispered, I shouldn't be here. And the darkness didn't move, didn't answer, didn't blink. But I felt something pass between us, quiet and cold, like a regret that didn't belong to me settling in my bones. I stepped back toward the door, slow, careful, trying not to disturb whatever waited in the corner. The floor creaked again, sharp this time. The shadow tightened, as though listening. I didn't look at it again. I let the cold air guide me out, my fingers brushing the doorframe as if apologizing for waking the place. When I stepped back into the clearing, fog curled around my legs, pulling the warmth from my skin. The cabin door stayed open behind me, the darkness inside unbroken, unmoving. But I could feel it, still watching, still waiting. As I backed away through the trees, the regret settled deeper, heavy, quiet, unshaken. I shouldn't have gone inside. I shouldn't have looked into that corner. I know that now. Some doors stay open long after you leave. Some shadows remember you longer than they should. The night settled around me like a thick blanket, cool and heavy against my skin. Early winter. Deep woods. A sky covered in pale cloud, letting through only the weakest light. I walked slowly, hands brushing against cold branches, breath drifting in soft, uneven clouds. The forest felt different tonight. Still but not silent. There was something waiting beneath the quiet. A pressure, a faint tremble in the air, like static clinging to the edges of every shadow. I took another step, then another, and that's when I felt it. A low hum, soft at first, barely there. A thread of sound pulling through the trees, vibrating against my ribs. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't loud. It settled over me the way fog settles over the ground. Slow, cool, patient. I stopped walking, but the hum kept moving. A long note stretching into the dark, almost melodic, almost warm. My breath thinned. Something inside me leaned toward the sound, as if listening with more than my ears. The shadows around me shifted, not from wind, not from my movement. They moved in small, rhythmic pulses, narrowing, stretching, leaning closer with each slow beat of the hum. I blinked hard, trying to steady my vision, but the shadows kept moving. They swayed along the tree trunks, slid across the cold ground, rippled in soft waves around my ankles. The hum deepened. I felt it roll through my legs, curling into my chest, drumming behind my teeth. A quiet pull, like hands made of gravity, like the forest had hooked something inside me and began to draw me forward. I don't want to go, I whispered to myself. My voice cracked in the cold air, but another part of me took a step anyway. The shadows reacted, moving in closer arcs, matching the beat of the hum with eerie precision. They weren't random. They were following something, someone deeper in the woods. I tried to step back, but my body didn't listen. My muscles trembled, fingers curling, heart beating too slowly. The hum smoothed everything out. Fear, thoughts, resistance, blurring them into a single warm pull. The trees around me bent inward, their branches dipping like silent heads, their bark humming under my fingertips when I brushed past. The forest wasn't just listening. It was answering. With every step I took, the shadows grew clearer. They thickened into long limbs, thin torsos, faces I couldn't fully see but felt the outline of in the corner of my vision. They kept their distance, but only barely. I could feel a cold breath at my back, sliding against my neck, pulling heat from my skin. The hum turned softer again, almost gentle, almost comforting. A melody I didn't know I knew, curling around my thoughts like a lullaby meant for someone who wasn't me. My feet dragged forward. Leaves crushed softly under my steps. My hands felt numb. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from that strange pull that kept tugging me closer to the source. The shadows around me rose and fell in slow, swaying motions, their rhythm matching my breath, their shapes melting into one another like dark water stirred by a steady current. I whispered, "Stop, please," but the hum didn't break. It only thickened, pressing against my ears, my spine, my throat. I reached a small clearing. Cold air swept around me, lifting the fog in pale ribbons. The hum came from the center. I didn't see anything there, only an empty patch of ground, wet leaves, a soft glow from nowhere I could name. But the shadows circled it, all of them moving in the same slow pattern, like they were worshiping something unseen, something humming through the earth. My legs twitched, ready to step inside the circle. I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed to stop, to run, to look away. But my body leaned forward, carried by that low vibration that wrapped around my bones and whispered, "Come closer." I felt the edge of the clearing under my boot. One more step, and I would be inside their rhythm. Part of it, part of them. The hum rose, a slow, trembling swell, and for the first time, I felt fear cut through the haze. Sharp, cold, real. I pulled back, just enough to break whatever held me. The shadows snapped in place, their rhythm faltering, their forms shifting like smoke shocked by wind. The hum wavered, for a moment, for a heartbeat. Then it softened again, almost disappointed, fading back into its low, steady tone. I stepped away from the clearing, then another step, then another until the forest swallowed the glow and the shadows thinned into normal darkness again. The hum followed me for a long time, vibrating through the cold air, through my chest, through the lonely spaces between the trees. It never stopped, not completely. Even now, I feel that faint rhythm inside me, soft, pulling, unsettled, like the forest is still waiting for me to take that last small step. The fog thickened around me as the night cooled. Late autumn, the kind of cold that clings to fabric, that sinks through sleeves and settles on the edges of my breath. My clothes felt damp. My hair stuck to my forehead, heavy with mist, each strand chilled and pulling at my skin. The trees stood tall and silent, their trunks fading into pale haze like they were dissolving into the air. I walked slowly, trying to keep my steps light, trying not to disturb whatever hid between the drifting clouds of fog. But something moved before I did, a faint rustling, soft, careful, circling. I froze, my breath thinned in the cold air, hanging in front of me like a trembling veil. The rustling continued, closer this time, like footsteps brushing across wet leaves, slow and patient, matching the beats of my heart. I turned toward the sound, but the fog swallowed everything. Only pale white shapes floated in the distance, trees stretching and fading as though their edges were being erased. I wiped moisture from my face, blinking hard as the mist clung to my eyelashes. Even that tiny movement felt too loud. The rustling shifted again, to my right, then behind me, then ahead, never in one place for long, never steady, always moving. I whispered, "Is someone there?" But my voice dissolved in the fog, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I waited. Silence. Then another rustle, quicker this time, as if something long and thin slipped between branches just out of sight. My hands grew cold. My fingers tingled with a faint electric feel of static that seemed to live inside this forest. I took a step forward, slow and careful. Moist soil shifted under my boot, mixing the smell of damp earth with the sharp scent of fog. Then I saw it, a stretched shape sliding between two trees. Barely more than a blur, but tall, too tall. Its body leaned in a strange angle, like it didn't fully understand how to hold itself upright. Before I could focus on it, it was gone. I blinked hard again, but the fog only thickened, curling around my ankles like cold fingers. Another rustle, to my left this time. Then a dark line flickered, long and thin, moving fast between the nearest trunks. I stepped back, but the fog made the world feel small. The trees closing in, their branches reaching down like they were trying to warn me or cage me or simply watch. My breath shook. The air tasted metallic, sharp against my tongue. I turned slowly in place, eyes straining against the pale gray curtain that wrapped around everything. Something shifted again, just a flicker. A silhouette stretched out longer than any person should be, gliding from one tree to the next in a single smooth motion. I blinked, and it vanished. The rustling circled me again, a soft loop of movement, never landing, never pausing. I felt small in that moment, alone, like the fog wasn't hiding them from me. It was hiding me from whatever watched. My heartbeat slowed, every thud echoing in my throat. I tried to steady my breathing, but the cold air stung my lungs. Another glimpse, this one closer. An elongated form bending low, arms trailing along the damp ground, body melting into fog as if the mist welcomed it. I stumbled back a step, my foot brushing dead leaves, their brittle edges scratching against each other. The rustling stopped. All at once, the silence pressed in, thick and uncomfortable, like the moment before a whisper you don't want to hear. I waited, every muscle locked, every breath too loud. Then, a flicker just at the edge of my sight, a shape leaning from behind a tree, slowly stretching into view, thin as a shadow, taller than the trunk it hid behind. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. Before my mind could make sense of it, the fog shifted and swallowed a whole, leaving only pale emptiness in its place. The rustling started again, faint, distant, moving away this time, as if whatever followed me was losing interest or circling somewhere else. I didn't move. I stayed still until my breath steadied, and the cold air stopped shaking in my chest. I knew I wasn't safe. I knew they were still out there, moving to the fog, too quick to catch, too strange to understand. But a part of me, a quiet, dangerous part of me, wanted to keep looking, to follow the rustling, to see those shapes again. Fear tangled with something else. A pull, a question, a curiosity that felt sharp and wrong and impossible to ignore. So I took a slow step forward, mist crawling up my legs, rustling drifting somewhere just ahead of me, and I let the fog decide where I would go next. The night felt softer here, quieter, like the forest was holding its breath just long enough for me to notice. Late autumn air pressed cool against my face, carrying a faint smell of wet bark and old leaves breaking down under cold. The fog had thinned, but not enough to disappear. It drifted low across the ground, curling around roots and clinging to my boots like it wanted to follow me. Above me, branches tangled together in a dark woven net, but the moon still managed to slip through the cracks. Pale light spilled down in thin strips, laying across the forest floor like long, cold fingers. Each branch twisted in strange shapes when the wind brushed against them, stretching shadows across the ground in twisted silhouettes that moved even when I didn't. I kept walking slowly, watching the way the moonlight shifted between the trees, how it made every shadow look stretched and wrong. My breath fogged the air in front of me. It rose in a soft cloud that glowed faintly as the moonlight touched it. For a moment, I felt strangely calm, wrapped in cold light and distant silence. Then something shifted just ahead of me. A shape, still, perfectly still. It stood between two trees, the pale light drawing a thin outline around its body, just enough to show that it was tall and human shaped, but not quite right. Its head tilted in a way that made my skin tighten, like it was trying to understand me from a distance. I blinked, once, slow, and it vanished, gone completely, as if the moonlight had erased it when my eyes closed. I froze, feeling my pulse rise and center my throat. The branches above me creaked softly, swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. I took a step back, but the fog brushed up my legs like something breathing slow and steady far too close. I stared into the empty space where the figure had been. The shadows there shifted, stretching thin and long across the dirt. For a second I thought I saw a movement, a flicker like someone leaning forward from behind a tree. But when I focused, there was nothing, just a pale light moving across the ground as the branches swayed overhead. My mind tried to fill in the shape again, try to place something there in the gaps between shadows. I whispered into the stillness. Am I imagining things? Even though the fog swallowed the words almost instantly, another strip of moonlight brightened, landing on the trunk of a tree farther ahead. And there, for the smallest moment, I saw it again. A silhouette, thin, motionless. It didn't move toward me. It didn't hide this time. It just was, still and quiet in the pale silver glow. The shape felt distant and close at the same time, like it existed between the trees, and inside my thoughts in the exact same moment. I blinked again. Gone. The moonlight shifted, the branches swayed, and the space widened into empty fog. My breath came out uneven, cool and shaky. I stepped closer, one slow foot at a time, letting the pale light spill across my hands as the forest opened slightly. Nothing waited for me there. No figure. No shadow shaped like a person. Only the cold glow moving gently over bark and leaves, soft as a quiet sigh. I let myself breathe deeper, feeling the forest settle again, the hush of branches, the faint rustle of leaves far above my head, the cold air brushing my cheeks like invisible fingertips. Maybe it was just the shadows. Maybe it was a fog playing with distance and bending shapes into whatever my mind feared most. Or maybe something really had been there, close enough to see, close enough to study me before melting back into the darkness. The branches shifted again, letting one more wave of pale light fall through the tangled canopy. It glittered across the fog, turning the air silver for a heartbeat. Strange but beautiful. I stood there in the glow, feeling the quiet wrap around me, wondering what else might be hiding in the light just beyond what my eyes could hold. And for the first time tonight, the fear softened just enough to let curiosity in. A soft, eerie wonder that made me look deeper into the shadows as the moonlight flickered through the branches above. The forest felt heavier that night. Late autumn. Air thin enough to sting when I breathed in. I chose a small clearing between the pines, a place where the ground dipped just enough to block the wind. At least, I thought it would. The leaves trembled in a slow, steady shiver. Not from weather. Just something moving through them. Something I couldn't see. I crouched down, hands stiff, and built a tiny pile of twigs and dry bark. The cold clung to my fingers like it didn't want to let go. When I struck the match, its tiny flare felt too bright in the dark around me. The flame shook, soft and nervous, before it touched the wood. The fire caught quickly, but the warmth didn't. I held my hands toward it, waiting for that familiar heat, that gentle swell against my palms. Instead, I felt only a thin breath of air, cold as fog rolling over a lake. I blinked, leaned closer, listened to the quiet hum of burning bark, a hum that somehow sounded a little too low, a little too slow. The firelight flickered across the clearing, but the shadows it cast reached farther than they should have. Long lines stretching behind the trees, bending around trunks like fingers searching for something. I sat still, tried to breathe normal, tried to believe it was just my eyes adjusting, that strange trick fires sometimes play when you stare too long. But the light changed again, sharper, paler, like the flames were made of frost instead of heat. My breath clouded in front of me, thick, white, as if the fire itself was pulling warmth from the air. The shadows moved with it, slow at first, dragging across the needles and dirt like they were stuck to the ground. Then quicker, rippling along the edge of my vision in long, crooked shapes. I rubbed my arms, tried to chase the cold from my skin, but the chill settled deeper, down the bone. In the quiet, the fire crackled once, a brittle, hollow crack that felt wrong in the stillness. Somewhere past the tree line, a faint rustling started, soft, careful, like someone brushing against branches while trying not to be heard. I turned my head. My heart stuttered. The trees stood motionless, but the sound continued, circling slowly around the clearing. The shadows near the fire lengthened again. They thinned into narrow lines, stretching past the logs, reaching toward me. I drew my knees closer, trying not to make noise, trying not to show the fear pushing tight against my ribs. The rustling faded. Then came something else. Breathing. Not mine. Not human. At least not in any way I understood. It was too steady, each inhale too long, each exhale too soft, like something huge trying to shrink itself down to the size of the darkness. The cold fire pulsed, a pale shimmer rising, like it recognized the breath and answered it. I whispered into my sleeve, a small, broken thought. Please, just stay back. But nothing listened. The breathing crept closer, moving through the branches without shaking them. A presence pressing against the quiet, pulling the night inward. I stared into the dark between the pines, eyes wide enough to water. The firelight stretched behind me, casting my shadow across the clearing. But even my own shape looked wrong. Too thin, too tall, as if it wanted to stand up without me. I shut my eyes, just for a moment, just to steady myself. But the breathing did not stop. It came from behind me now, warm against the back of my neck, even though the air stayed freezing. I didn't turn. Couldn't. The pale fire flickered, its flames curling inward like petals closing around a secret. The ground seemed to hum beneath me, a steady vibration, as if something was shifting right under the dirt. When I finally opened my eyes, the shadows were still. All of them. Every stretched shape, every twisted line. Frozen in place, like they'd been caught watching me and didn't want me to notice. The breathing faded again, slowly, drifting back into the darkness between the trees. Not gone, just waiting. The fire dipped lower, its color turning from pale white to strange, dull blue. Cold seeped deeper into the clearing, curling around my ankles, settling in my chest. I sat there, unable to move, staring at a flame that felt more like moonlight than heat. And in that stillness, I realized something simple, something quiet, something I didn't want to believe. Some campfires warm the body, some warm the night. This one was warming something else, something watching, something patient. And as the fire slowly sank into embers, I felt it, that soft, growing dread spreading across the clearing like a hand waiting to close. The forest felt different the next morning. Colder, quieter, as if the night hadn't fully lifted, even though the sky showed pale daylight. Late autumn air pressed against my skin, thin and sharp, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves and old bark peeling. I walked slowly, boots sinking into soft earth, trying to stay on the narrow path I remembered from the day before. But the ground had changed. New trails forked off the main one. Thin lines pressed into the soil, like something to walk through while the rest of the forest slept. I didn't know why I followed them, only that I felt a pull, gentle, steady, like an unseen hand resting lightly between my shoulder blades. A quiet guidance, a soft suggestion. Step here, not there. I tried ignoring it, tried choosing another direction. But every time I shifted, the trees leaned slightly, branches lowering like arms blocking the way I wasn't meant to go. So I moved forward, through the narrowing trail, listening to the faint hum of wind slipping through needles above me. The fog thickened with every step, a pale curtain sliding in, giving the air a cold taste like rain waiting to fall. My vision shrank to a thin tunnel of gray. The shapes of trees blurred together, trunks rising like shadows instead of wood. I felt small in it, alone but not untouched. The trails guided me deeper. They curled around roots, dipped under low branches, twisted between rocks in ways too precise to be random. I paused once, letting my breath settle, watching it plume upward in slow white drift. The fog around me shifted in that same moment, just slightly, like something massive exhaled back. I didn't run. I just kept walking, barely lifting my feet in case the ground beneath me decided to move again. The forest felt alive, not in the way trees breathe or leaves rustle. More intentional, more aware. The static in the air grew stronger as I continued forward. A prickling against my arms, a low vibration under my steps, almost like the earth was humming a direction to me. I reached a bend in the trail where the fog dipped lower, gathering in thick folds near the ground. It brushed against my legs like cold fabric, clinging for a moment before sliding away. The narrowing path opened suddenly into a thin corridor of trees, their branches arching overhead like a tunnel carved by hands instead of nature. Every leaf was still, every shadow held its place. The silence felt deep, Not empty, but listening, I stepped inside. The air cooled again, settling in my chest like a hell breath. My footsteps softened, barely whispering across the damp soil. Halfway through the corridor, I felt something behind me, a faint rustling, low and slow, like something moving its weight from one place to another. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only fog thickening in the shape of a doorway that wasn't there before. I swallowed hard. Heat rose in my throat, even as the cold wrapped around my neck. I took one step forward, then another. The path curved gently left, as if anticipating me, as if shaping itself for the exact length of my stride. The trees shifted position. Barely. A branch lifting, a trunk leaning, a root folding under leaves like an arm withdrawing. They didn't move when I looked at them, only when I looked away. My breath felt loud in my ears, even though the rest of the forest remained silent. Too silent. I stopped again, letting the stillness settle around my ankles, feeling the cold slide upward like rising water. The fog behind me thickened once more, closing off the way I'd come until it was only a flat wall of pale white. Not moving, not drifting, just waiting. I faced forward. The path narrowed to a slit of darkness, a thin line between two large pines, barely wide enough for one person. My chest tightened. Every instinct said stop. Every breath said turn around. But that unseen pull, that gentle pressure at my back, did not let me go. It nudged, not forceful, just certain. And the certainty was almost comforting. Almost. I stepped through the slit between the pines. Fog rushing around me, soft and thick, wrapping my arms, my ribs, my throat. The cold settled deeper, until I felt hollowed out, light enough for the forest to carry. The path disappeared entirely. Only faint markings remained. Thin depressions in the dirt, like footprints smoothed by time, leading onward into a gray blur. I followed them. Every step felt written before my foot touched the ground. Every turn felt chosen before I saw it. The forest adjusted around me, trees shifting their weight, branches parting, fog gathering in ways that shaped the world into the only direction I was allowed to go. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't kind, just guiding, always guiding. The footprints ahead grew fainter. So faint I almost lost them, until the fog thinned enough for me to see one last trail curving into the distance. A trail I didn't recognize. A trail I never would have noticed without the gentle push behind my spine. My breath trembled. The cold climbed higher, settling behind my eyes. I stepped onto the new path. The forest held its breath. So did I, and as the fog closed behind me, I felt the quiet shift, soft, deliberate, as if something unseen had finally guided me exactly where it wanted. The air was colder than usual that night. Fog drifted low across the clearing, curling around my boots, soaking into the cuffs of my pants. I crouched near the dying embers of the fire, watching the last sparks fade into the dark. The forest smelled damp, earthy, with a faint trace of smoke lingering. That's when I noticed the footprints. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fog, shadows pressing into the soft ground. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw them clearly. Circles, perfect circles of footprints around a camp, small and shallow, too neat to have been random. And they weren't mine. I stood slowly, breathing in the damp night air, trying to place something familiar in them. But there was nothing, no pattern I recognized. Only motionless footprints spinning around me like they had formed while I slept. The hairs along my neck prickled. A soft, static hum hovered between the trees, almost imperceptible but unmistakably there. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint, like someone speaking through a long tunnel. At first, it seemed like the wind, but the tone, the cadence, was wrong. It mimicked me, a soft echo of my own voice, asking questions I couldn't answer. Questions that didn't even exist until I heard them. I froze. The fog shifted around my ankles, coiling like a living thing. My hands trembled slightly from the cold or from the awareness that I was being watched. I stepped toward the nearest circle of footprints. They sank slightly under my fingers as I brushed them, but left no trace of disturbance, as if they were made of fog itself. Not soil. Another whisper brushed past my ear. Closer this time. It echoed the rhythm of my heartbeat, low and insistent, asking something I couldn't comprehend. I turned in a slow circle, fog pressing against my cheeks, my breath curling in the air, but the camp was empty. Nothing moved except the fog. Nothing breathed except me. I stepped back toward the fire, and the whispers paused. A brief silence. Then they returned, faint, mocking, repeating words I hadn't spoken aloud. Every step I took, I felt the soft pressure of presence behind me, like hands brushing just beyond touch. Circling closer, never showing themselves. I crouched down again, hands pressed over my ears. The whispers didn't stop. They mirrored my thoughts now, asking what I feared, what I hoped, questions I couldn't answer, because I didn't know the answers myself. The footprints glimmered faintly in the pale light of the dying embers, circles within circles, tracing patterns that made no sense. Some led to the trees, others led back to me, as if the forest itself had decided to replay my steps in some silent, deliberate game. I touched one of the prints again. Cold, not just cold, like the absence of warmth, like it had never existed except to remind me I was not alone. The whispering shifted again, softly, teasingly, so close I could feel it curl against my neck. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around my chest, the fog curling tighter with each movement. I didn't move for a long time. The air thickened, dense with silence and expectation. The footprints seemed to breathe in place, spinning in their endless circles like they were waiting for me to finally see. I dared one glance around the camp. Nothing. Only fog. Only shadow. Only the faint shimmer of footprints that were never there when I blinked. The whispers faded slightly, leaving behind an uneasy hum. Not gone, just quiet, watching, testing. I remained crouched, listening to my own breath, feeling the soft scrape of fog along the ground, touching the edge of every footprint with hands that were trembling. The forest held its secret. The circles of prints stayed, perfect and endless, unbroken, spinning softly around the camp like invisible hands had drawn them while I slept. I didn't dare stand. I didn't dare leave. I only stayed, still as a mist, trying to breathe without inviting them closer, trying to be small enough to not be noticed. And the whispers lingered, soft and uncertain, like questions without answers, like shadows circling just beyond the edge of sight. Unease settled into my bones, and I realized that sometimes the forest doesn't need to show itself to be completely present. The air was damp and heavy. Late evening. Fog hovered low across the undergrowth, clinging to the tips of fallen leaves, turning them slick and dark. I moved slowly, boots pressing into soft, wet soil, feeling the earth give slightly under each step. The smell of pine mixed with a faint tang of decay, thick and bitter. Silence stretched across the forest. Too deep. Even the wind seemed hesitant as it weaved through the branches above me. Then it came, a hollow sound, ringing through the trees low and empty, like a bell struck far away in a hollow trunk. It vibrated in my chest, resonating with the fog, making the mist curl and sway as if it were listening. I paused, fingers brushing over damp bark. The air felt thicker here, clinging to my skin, pressing down with invisible weight. Another sound. Branches cracked high above me. Slow, deliberate, yet no wind stirred. No weight was visible. I looked up, and for a moment my heart stopped. A figure, high in the canopy. Still, watching. Pale light from the setting sun glimmered on it, reflecting off something. Eyes, maybe, or just a glint of bark shaped like eyes. It didn't move, just observed, held in place like a shadow carved from the branches themselves. I swallowed. My breath came out in a shaky puff, mixing with the fog. The forest held it there, soft and suspended. The hollow sound rang again, closer now, echoing along the trunks, reverberating in a rhythm that felt unnervingly like a heartbeat just slightly out of sync with my own. A soft hum joined it, rising from the damp earth, trembling through the soles of my boots, so quiet I almost thought I imagined it. Branches shifted overhead, cracked under weight I couldn't see. A subtle shift, then silence. The figure remained, watching with unblinking attention. I wanted to look away. I wanted to convince myself it wasn't real. But I couldn't. Not yet. My fingers brushed the fog-drenched leaves, cold and slick, and I felt the hollow hum again, pressing against my ribs, filling my lungs with a cold, rhythmic thrum. I took a step back. The soil sank slightly under my boots. The figure's presence didn't move, but the branches above shivered, small cracks echoing like whispers in the distance. A fleeting shadow danced at the edge of my vision, curling along the mist. I blinked. It vanished. The forest breathed with me now, each rustle, each hollow echo, woven into a single pulse. I couldn't tell where I ended and the watching began. I tried to measure distance. The figure stayed exactly above, silent, patient, its outline blending into the branches, its gaze never leaving me. The fog thickened again, pressing against my calves, curling around my knees, folding into itself like living silk. The hollow ringing came once more, filling the space between the trunks, making the shadows sway as if they were sentient, like the forest itself had leaned closer to listen. I breathed slowly, trying to anchor myself in the damp earth, but the figure's presence was everywhere, not moving, yet moving, woven into the low hum of the fog, the shifting branches, the brittle, invisible weight above. I crouched low, hands pressed to the cold soil. The hollow sound softened, then rose again, a rhythm pulsing through the trees, through the fog, through me. The figure tilted slightly, or maybe it was the branches moving, the light shifting. I couldn't tell. The edge of reality felt thin. I exhaled slowly, fog curling from my lips, and realized I hadn't blinked in minutes. The forest held its breath with me, the figure suspended in pale light, watching, waiting. I stood, one careful step, then another. The fog parted slightly for me, the hollow sound softening to a distant echo, branches cracking faintly in response. I walked slowly out of that clearing, leaving the low hum behind me, feeling its vibration fade to the soles of my boots, but carrying it in my chest, like a secret the forest had pressed against my ribs. When I glanced back, the figure was gone, yet the quiet weight lingered, and I knew it had not left, not entirely, only watching from somewhere just out of reach. The forest smelled strange tonight. Wet earth, damp leaves, and something else, a sharp tang of iron, mixed with the musk of wet fur. I paused, letting my boots sink into the soft soil, breath curling in front of me like smoke from a candle trapped in fog. A distant howl cut through the night, slow, drawn, almost answering the shallow gasp of my own inhale. It trembled across the trees, hitting each trunk like a hollow drum, then fading, leaving a quiet emptiness behind. I shivered, pressing my arms close to my chest. The fog curled around my legs, clinging like wet cloth, and I felt every drop of cold settle into my bones. Something moved. I couldn't see it at first. Only a shadow, stretching unnaturally, slipping between the trunks in a rhythm that mimicked mine. Every step I took, it matched. Every pause, every shallow breath. I felt its presence beside me or behind me, and sometimes in front, though my eyes saw nothing. The smell grew stronger, for it pressed against the air, iron tang rolling in with the wind, and I realized it wasn't just the scent of an animal. It was something watching, matching me, learning me. I took a careful step. The shadow moved again, perfectly synchronized. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't fog bending. It was deliberate and slow. I stopped, held my breath. The fog wrapped tighter around my ankles, coiling like a snake. The shadow paused, matching my stillness, as if breathing with me in measured imitation. The distant howl returned, closer this time, sharper, hollow and long, piercing the cold, wet air. It didn't echo, it replied, a call and response that made my chest tighten and my stomach churn. I felt its weight now, not physical, but pressing against the space around me, flattening the fog, brushing against my hair, sliding along my arms. It smelled like wet fur, like something damp and alive pressed against the earth. I whispered a name. Nothing answered, except the echo of my voice, slightly stretched, slightly wrong, drifting back at me from somewhere just beyond the fog. Every instinct told me to run, but the ground seemed to hold me. Each footfall sank softly as if the earth itself was waiting for my next move. I stepped sideways. It stepped sideways. I tried backward. It moved backward. No noise, no snap of branch, no disturbance in the fog. Only mimicry. The air thickened with static. My skin prickled, hair rising along my arms and neck, and I felt the forest lean closer, watching, listening, breathing. Another howl, closer. Near enough now that I could feel the vibration in my ribs. I tried to measure distance, to spot it, but fog and shadow twisted together, blurring the lines between what was real and what I imagined. I froze. The shadow didn't. It shifted slightly, leaning forward, stretching just enough to suggest movement, but never enough to reveal form. The smell of fur and iron grew stronger, clung to my clothes, wrapped around my throat. I gagged slightly, pressing my hand in my mouth, and it mimicked that too, silent and perfect. I spun around. Nothing there. The fog hung thick. Branches swayed overhead without wind. Shadows lengthened and bent in ways they shouldn't, as if the trees themselves had learned to move with it. I took another step forward. It followed, matching me exactly, breathing in sync. I could almost hear its lungs, a low rasp mixed with a metallic tang in the air. I swallowed. My own breath rattled. The forest held still, expectant. Every crackle of leaf, every wet scrape of branch felt magnified. Then the howling stopped, and the shadow waited. I stopped too, fog coiling around my boots, static tingling in the air. For a long moment, nothing moved except my heartbeat, thumping uneven and loud in my chest. I realized then that whatever was, it wasn't just copying me. It was learning, measuring, waiting. I didn't turn. I didn't run. I only stood, frozen in the damp forest, feeling the shadow press against me without ever touching. The smell lingered, wet fur and iron. The hollow echo faded, but the presence remained. Still, silent, mimicking, and I knew, deep in my chest, that it had not left. It was only waiting for the next breath. The night was damp and still. Fog hung low, curling around the trunks of the trees, weaving between roots that rose like pale fingers from soil. The air smelled of wet earth, moss, and something faintly metallic. I walked slowly, boots pressing softly into mud, feeling it yield under each careful step. The forest seemed to lean closer, as if listening, holding its breath along with mine. Shadows stretched long across the clearing, thin ribbons of darkness following the trunks and branches. At first, I thought they moved only as the moonlight shifted, casting familiar shapes onto the wet ground. But then I noticed a shadow lifted from a gnarled root, detached from the source of its body. It lingered for a moment, hovering, as if deciding what to do next. I froze. My breath caught, steam curling slowly before me. The forest smelled colder now, and the fog seemed thicker, pressing against my arms and legs. The shadow watched me, a still, dark presence, its edges sharp in the dim light. I wanted to move, to step back, but my feet felt rooted in the damp soil. Other shadows followed, slowly, almost cautiously, detaching from their forms, gliding across the ground in silence. They paused in the corners of my vision, then shifted again, moving without urgency but with strange, deliberate attention. I sensed them before I saw them fully. A chill brush in my neck, the slight hum of air stirred too quietly to be wind, and a soft rustle in the fog that didn't match the movement of leaves. I took a shallow step forward. One shadow mirrored me, hovering a foot away, stretching toward me without touch. It paused when I paused, glided when I moved, like an echo with intent. The fog shifted around my legs, curling higher as if it wanted to hide the forest secrets. I could smell damp pine, the faint decay of fallen branches, and the cold sweat along my neck. Another shadow glided across the clearing. It didn't belong to any tree or figure. It hovered, then paused, and for a moment I felt its gaze, empty but aware, settled directly on me. I tried to blink. When I opened my eyes, it was still there, still watching, edges wavering in the pale light. The shadows moved again. Some crossed each other, brushes of darkness passing over the fog. Their movements were slow, deliberate, like something alive, but not bound to flesh. I listened. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves. only the soft static of the fog rolling against the ground and the occasional creak of a distant branch under unseen weight. I took a cautious step back. The shadows shifted in response, hovering closer for a heartbeat, then drifting away, gliding silently over roots and moss. A cold hum filled the air, barely perceptible, as if the forest itself was breathing to the shapes of darkness. I pressed my arms around myself, feeling the damp cling to my skin, the fog curling between my fingers, the quiet tension in the space around me. One shadow lingered longer than the others, hovering near a hollow stump, its shape stretching unnaturally, edges bending as if it could expand or shrink at will. It watched, still unblinking. The forest seemed to exhale around me. Branches swayed gently, though the wind had died. The shadows drifted apart, gliding back toward their sources. Yet I felt the weight of them in the spaces between trees long after they left. I stepped forward again. The fog parted slightly, revealing only the faint outlines of returning darkness. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, except the soft shiver of my own skin and the pulse of unease in my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't call out. I walked slowly, letting the fog cling to my ankles, the cold pressing along my spine, knowing that the shadows lingered, even when unseen, even when silent. Uneasy silence settled over the clearing. The forest exhaled, leaving only the whisper of fog and the memory of watching darkness that moved without form, without origin, without need for me to see it. The fog lay heavy tonight, curling around the tree trunks like fingers. Each step I took sank softly into the damp soil, smelling of wet pine and rotting leaves. The forest felt smaller somehow, as if it had drawn in closer around me. I caught it first at the corner of my eye. A figure, just there, barely more than a silhouette, blending with the fog. When I turned fully, nothing was there. I thought it was a trick. The fog, the moonlight, shadows twisting in rhythm with the wind. But then it flickered again. Closer, just out of reach, yet unmistakable. My breath came uneven, cold mist in the air. Every nerve in my body felt the hum of static tension around me, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I stepped forward slowly, boots pressing into the slick earth. The fog shifted with me, curling around my legs, wrapping tighter with every movement. And there it was again, the flicker of a shape at the edge of vision. I blinked, turned, closer. My heart ticked in my chest like a slow drum. I tried to measure distance. Impossible. Every time I shifted my gaze, it moved, shrinking the space between us without a sound. I paused. The forest held me in stillness. Branches hung low, dripping moisture onto my shoulders. A wet, earthy scent filled my nostrils, and the air pressed heavily against my chest. The figure flickered again. Closer. Now I could see a pale outline, too thin, too straight, like a shadow stretching toward me. I blinked, and it was gone. Or maybe it never fully existed. I breathed slowly, tried to anchor myself in the damp, quiet earth. The fog coiled around my ankles, swallowing the soft sound of my boots, making every step uncertain. I turned sharply. There, not far, just beyond a cluster of twisted roots. Its presence was undeniable, weightless, but tethered somehow to the space between the trees. I froze. The figure paused, watching, a ripple in the mist. The air felt charged, tingling against my skin, filling my ears with a quiet hum. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. Only my shallow breaths escaped, clouding the fog before me. Each exhale seemed to draw it nearer, narrowing the distance without a single sound. I took a hesitant step back. The figure mirrored the motion, a ghostly echo of movement. No detail, no face, only the faint, shifting presence that lingered in the corner of my sight. The forest seemed to pulse around us. Leaves rustled softly without wind. Branches creaked faintly. The fog curled higher, clinging to my hair, pressing cold and damp against my neck. And still, the flicker moved closer, timing each glide with mine. I blinked again, turned my head. Gone. And yet I could feel it, somewhere in the thickness of the fog, breathing with the same rhythm I did, matching the tilt of my shoulders, the lift of my foot. I tried to move faster, step quicker, but the fog resisted, clinging, sliding over my boots, slapping cold against my shins. The figure flickered again, closer, always just beyond the limits of my vision. My chest tightened. I swallowed, taste of wet leaves and iron filling my mouth. The shadows shifted, and for a heartbeat I thought I could see two figures now. But it was only the flicker of movement tricking my mind. I stopped entirely. The fog wrapped me in silence, cold and suffocating. The forest held its breath, and the figure held its place, closer than I had imagined, yet impossible to touch. I exhaled slowly, tried to focus on the wet soil, the smell of moss and decay, anything to ground myself. And still, the flicker lingered, shifting slightly with every twitch of my eyes, reminding me that the forest was not empty. I walked slowly, keeping my gaze low, fog swirling around my boots, heart hammering quietly in my chest. The figure did not disappear entirely. It lingered, always at the edge of vision, pulling closer with every step, and I knew I could never escape the feeling that had been waiting all along. The forest thinned, revealing a clearing where fog pooled low, pressing against the frozen ground. I stepped carefully, boots crunching faintly on frost, cold seeping through the soles, fingers stiff against the chill. Ahead, the lake lay silent. Ice stretched flat and pale, a mirror warped by frost and shadow. Branches leaned over it, their reflections bending and twisting, as if the water was breathing. I knelt at the edge, smelling the wet pine, the frozen mud, and the faint tang of something metallic lingering in the cold air. The surface rippled under my gaze, though the wind was still. My own reflection stared back, pale and quiet, but the edges of my features seemed wrong. Eyes too wide, a slow, curling grin that I had never made. I blinked. The grin lingered. My breath caught in my chest. Fog rolled higher, coiling around my boots, pressing damp against my calves. I leaned closer. The reflection mimicked me perfectly. Every movement of my hand, every shift of my weight, echoed, except for the mouth. The mouth stretched a little wider each time I blinked. The ice seemed to hum, low and steady, vibrating through the ground. I could feel under my fingers as I rested my palms against the frozen edge. A subtle pulse, like the lake itself was breathing, watching, waiting. I tried to step back. My boots slipped slightly on frost, and the surface shimmered, throwing fractured versions of the trees around me. Reflections multiplied, staggered, bending in angles that made my stomach tighten. I froze. The grin remained. Slow, patient, knowing. It did not blink. It did not breathe. It only watched, curling at the edges in a way I couldn't mimic or escape. A faint rustle drew my attention. Branches overhead shifted, and ice along the bank cracked faintly under hidden weight. I could smell the damp pine, the metallic tang again, and the soft decay of leaves pressed into the frozen soil. I reached to touch the ice. Fingers pressed cold biting skin. The reflection mirrored my action, but the grin widened further. Slow, unnatural. My heart drummed in my chest, a hollow rhythm I couldn't slow. I stepped back. The frost under my boots hissed softly. The lake shimmered, reflections rippling in ways the cold should not allow. The trees bent and stretched, their limbs folding into impossible angles. And still, the grin lingered, waiting for me to look again. I turned to leave. The fog thickened, pressing against my shoulders, against my hair, but the reflection followed. No glass, no ice could contain it. It was patient, slow, perfectly waiting for my gaze to meet it again. I stumbled backward, breath forming small clouds in the air. The ice hung beneath me, a low, constant vibration that pressed into my chest and made my fingers tingle. I looked once more. The reflection's grin had grown, stretching wider than any human mouth should. Eyes locked onto mine, deep and still, and I realized that I had invited it here, by curiosity, by stepping too close, by wanting to see. Regret pressed against me. Cold, heavy, suffocating. I tried to pull my gaze, turn my back, but the image stayed, etched into the ice, following my every step. I stumbled forward, fog swallowing my boots. Branches scraped my arms, the scent of frozen pine and wet metal lingering, and I felt the lake breathe behind me, shivering under the ice, waiting in silence. I didn't dare look back again. Not fully. Not after seeing the grin that was not mine. The reflection stayed cold, patient, etched into the frozen mirror of the lake, reminding me that curiosity had a cost. The forest held quiet, only the softness of ice under my weight, the chill pressing into every movement, and the memory of a grin that would not leave. The night pressing close, fog clinging to my boots, to the hair at my neck. A cold draft slid between the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Then, faintly, a sound, soft, almost tender, like fabric brushing against bark. It fluttered and shifted, following me without pattern, a rhythm I could not place. I paused. The wind stilled, but the rustling remained. I tilted my head, trying to trace the source. Shadows moved where the fog thinned, elongated, draped shapes hanging between the trunks like forgotten cloth. I focused. They vanished, edges blurred, absorbed by the mist, leaving only the faint scent of smoke and something metallic, subtle, curling to the damp air. I stepped forward slowly. The soil was slick beneath my boots, wet leaves whispering against each other. The shapes returned, hanging closer now, folded into the curves of trees, their tattered forms brushing the fog. I breathed in sharply. Cold filled my lungs, and my skin prickled with static. Every movement I made was echoed by the faintest swish of unseen fabric, as though the forest itself had donned shadows that drifted just beyond my sight. I blinked. The forms were gone, but the rustling remained, a whispering chorus that threaded through the trunks and branches. I felt their presence even where nothing could be seen. A pale light from the moon spilled through gaps in the canopy, touching the shapes briefly before they dissolved into darkness. The fog shivered with their passing, curling around my calves, pressing damp against my skin. I reached out, almost on instinct, fingers trembling in the cold. The air felt thick, weighted with something waiting, something patient. The tattered shadows swirled and stretched where my eyes could not follow, then disappeared as though they had never been. Silence followed, heavy and low, filled only by the soft crack of branches and the occasional brush of leaves. Yet the rustling returned, gentle, teasing, pulling at my attention with a rhythm I could not name. I turned slowly, barely daring to breathe. The shapes drifted at the edge of my vision, elongated, pale, folding in on themselves, and vanishing again whenever I focused fully. The cold pressed harder now, sliding into my sleeves, biting at my fingertips. The wind carried a hint of decay and something almost like wet cloth, sour and forgotten. Every step I took made the forest hum softly, as though it were alive and moving with me. I stepped back, heart thudding against my ribs. The fog wrapped higher, tangling around my boots and ankles, and the rustling followed. It never stopped, not completely. A whisper in the space, just beyond reach. I knelt to touch the ground, fingers brushing wet leaves and icy soil. The movement drew the shapes nearer, tattered shadows floating just above the earth, hovering in folds of fog, then folding away again. I wanted to call out, to name them, to anchor the rustling, but my throat closed. All I could do was breathe, watch, listen, and wait for the flicker at the edge of vision to come and go, like the brush of fabric on skin. The forest sighed around me, branches trembling gently, shadows curling and stretching. I took a careful step forward. The shapes drifted aside, moving silently through the mist, never quite leaving, never quite present. I exhaled slowly. The rustling softened, folding into the quiet hum of the night. But the memory lingered, pulling at my thoughts, a touch I could not shake. The shapes were gone. The fog thickened, and I continued on, alone, with a sense of uneasy curiosity pressing against my chest, and the memory of tattered shadows that brushed against the edges of reality. The fog lay thick, pressing against my boots, wrapping around the lower branches. Cold seeped into my sleeves, clinging to my skin, and carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. Then I saw them. Eyes, pale and round, blinking slowly in sequences I could not follow. They hovered just above the fog, no bodies beneath them, only the faintest shimmer, as if the mist itself held them. I froze. A cold draft brushed my neck, fingers of wind threading through the fog. The eyes blinked again. 1, 2, 3, then a pause. I moved slightly, shifting my weight. They followed. Every step mirrored, yet no shape existed. Branches cracked under my boots, wet leaves sticking to soles. The forest felt alive, its breath brushing the back of my neck. The blinking continued, some in pairs, some alone, like punctuation marks in a language I could not read. I exhaled slowly, fog curling around my hair, touching my cheeks damp and cold. Each blink of the eyes made the air feel heavier, charged, thick with something I could neither see nor name. I tilted my head. They weren't still. They moved in subtle arcs, tracking me, hovering in spaces of fog shifted. I tried to focus on one. It vanished. Another appeared, blinking, waiting, watching. A faint rustle of leaves echoed in quiet, soft against the hush of the fog. I felt my heart thrum, blood pulsing in my ears, and the eyes followed, patient, silent, unblinking between flickers. I stepped forward. Mist brushed my ankles, cold moisture clinging to my boots. The eyes split into more clusters, blinking in patterns that made no sense, circling me in slow arcs as though the forest itself had grown faces made of nothing but pale light. I stopped. The world narrowed. Fog curled higher, pressing damp against my sleeves, and the blink sequences slowed, becoming almost deliberate, like a language I almost understood but could not. The air hummed softly, a vibration through the soles of my boots, through the damp in my hair. The eyes followed. All around. No figures. No sound but my breath. Yet I knew I was not alone. I exhaled again. The fog shifted with my movement, and the eyes traced the gap between me and the trees. They blinked in tandem once, then scattered into small clusters, vanishing into the dense gray, only to reappear moments later in a place I had just looked. I crouched slightly, fingers brushing the frost-covered leaves, ground damp beneath my palms. The air pressed tighter, cold, moist, scented with pine and decay, and the blinking eyes seemed closer, hovering just above the fog surface, following each breath, each heartbeat. I dared to glance over my shoulder. Eyes, blinking. No bodies, no shapes, just hollow pupils in shifting mist and a quiet weight pressing at my chest. I moved slowly, deliberately, each footstep careful, barely breaking the silence. The fog swirled around my boots, whispering over the wet soil, and the eyes traced the arcs I made, turning with me, never leaving, never fully visible. I exhaled again. Cold air touched my cheeks, fog curling damp against my neck. They blinked slowly, almost an acknowledgement of my presence, almost as if the forest itself was aware, watching, measured, patient. I dared not look too long, just enough to know they were there, hovering in the gray, waiting in sequences I could not comprehend. I walked on. The fog swallowed my boots. The trees bent faintly overhead in the hollow, blinking eyes followed in silence, a quiet dread pressing in that I could neither shake nor name. Mist clung to the low branches, wrapping my arms and hair in damp threads. The forest smelled of cold earth and pine, sharp and wet. I stepped forward. Leaves crunched underfoot, but the sound felt hollow, like it didn't fully exist. Then I noticed the trail behind me, gone. No footprints, no broken twigs, nothing but mist curling into emptiness. A shiver ran along my spine. The air pressed close, heavy with silence. Yet the forest seemed to urge me on, soft and insistent. I walked faster, or maybe I thought I did. The ground shifted underfoot, wet soil sinking slightly, and still the path behind vanished. Every branch I passed stood untouched, as if I had never walked there. The fog thickened, swelling around my boots and ankles. It muffled the rustling of leaves, but my own breath came loud, clouding in the pale light. I paused. A cold wind brushed my neck, whispering over damp skin. I glanced behind me. Empty air, just gray mist curling in slow spirals. Panic stirred softly, a quiet hum under my ribs. I swallowed it, breath warm and fleeting against the chill. The forest still pushed me forward, every step feeling both my own and someone else's guiding hand. Branches bent low, dripping moisture onto my sleeves. Shadows stretched across the fog, moving slightly as if alive. I blinked. When my eyes opened, The trail behind me was still gone. I walked again, feet heavy in mud, boots slipping slightly on moss. The smell of wet leaves and decay rose in layers, clinging to my hair, to my fingertips brushing damp bark. The forest seemed to breathe with me, soft rustling in the distance matching my steps, yet out of rhythm. I could not tell if I led it or it led me. A hollow silence wrapped around the trees. The fog thickened further, curling into my sleeves and boots, and the forest pressed closer. I felt the path folding in on itself, erasing all memory of where I had been. I stopped again. Cold seeped into my chest, tight and quiet. The mist moved like smoke around my knees, and in the hollow stillness, I could almost hear it. The forest breathing, waiting. I turned slowly, half expecting a trail to appear, and found nothing. No sign of where I had walked. Just mist, empty air, and the scent of damp pine. Every step I took was mirrored by the fog, curling in the space I left behind, swallowing footprints, twisting leaves back into place. It was patient, careful, as if the forest wanted to forget me even as I moved forward. I pressed on, each step uncertain, boots sinking slightly in soft soil. Mist drifted into my eyes, coating lashes with cold moisture. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, steady and insistent, and the forest around me seemed to hum softly, an echo of something unspoken. I glanced over my shoulder again. Empty gray, twisting and curling in slow eddies. No trail, no footprints, no sign that I had ever been here at all. A shiver ran down my spine, skin prickling with static chill. Yet my feet moved on, driven forward by a subtle compulsion, a whispering in the marrow that I could not resist. The fog clung closer, coiling around my ankles, touching my calves damp and cold. I inhaled, smell of wet moss and pine filling my nose, and moved forward, step after careful step. Trail forgot behind me, vanished into nothing, and the forest hummed, soft, steady, and patient, guiding me deeper into its quiet suspense. Mist wrapped the forest in silver threads, settling on every branch, every leaf. The air was damp, cold against my skin, and carried the faint smell of wet bark and moss. I walked slowly, boots sinking into soft soil. Each step pressed soundlessly into the fog, yet the forest seemed to hum quietly around me, a low vibration in the air, as if the trees themselves exhaled. Then I heard it, a voice, soft, distant, but unmistakable. It echoed from above, from high in the canopy. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't wind. It was my own voice, asking questions I could not answer. I froze, breath clouded in front of me, wet fog sticking to my lashes. The branches above shivered, and the voice came again, closer this time, lingering between rustling leaves. I tilted my head, trying to see through the tangle of branches. Shadowed limbs reached across the pale sky, thick with mist, but nothing moved like it should. Nothing moved at all. The voice repeated, softly, curiously, as if it had learned my tone, my rhythm, the way I hesitate mid-step. It asked the same impossible questions, words curling in my ears and settling along my spine. I swallowed. The damp air filled my mouth, taste of wet earth and decay. The fog pressed closer, curling around my ankles and calves, weightless yet persistent. Every breath I took felt mirrored, as if the forest inhaled and exhaled with me. Rustling high above answered my slow, careful steps. Each pause I made was mimicked in rhythm by whispering leaves, voices folding into each other, questioning me in tones I knew too well. I moved forward, step by cautious step, but the sound followed. Not footsteps, not shadow, voices. My own voice fractured and carried in the branches, echoing questions I could not answer, pulling my mind upward toward the canopy, toward the impossible heights where the whispers lingered. I stopped again. The fog twisted around my boots, wet threads creeping along my sleeves. A shiver ran down my neck. The forest above remained still, but the voices did not stop. They coiled in the branches, hovered at the edge of my vision, and called in tones shaped like me. I tilted my head back, trying to catch a glimpse of movement. Branches trembled in a rhythm too precise for wind. Leaves rustled without wind. The voice pulsed again, soft and coaxing, and I realized it had learned me, copied my pauses, shadowed my hesitation. The smell of damp bark and rot clung to my nose, sharp against the smooth rhythm of my breathing. I wanted to step back, turn, escape, but my feet moved as though guided by something unseen. The canopy seemed alive. High branches swayed without a breeze, casting shadows that flickered across the fog. Every shadow mirrored my own stance, then shifted slightly, just out of sync, just enough to be disorienting. I whispered a question, barely audible, and it came back to me, not as my voice, but as something other, layered over my own tone, folded into a cadence that made my chest tighten. The fog thickened, wrapping my arms, my face, my hair. The whispers pressed closer, coiling around each breath, following every movement, hovering just above my ears, just out of reach, yet intimate as my own heartbeat. I wanted to run. My legs shook. The cold seeped through boots and socks, into my calves and knees, and still the whispers flowed, layered, infinite, asking questions I could not answer, in tones I could not distinguish from my own. I stopped completely. Silence folded around me for a heartbeat. Then the canopy answered, soft, insistent, unavoidable. A long, quiet sigh that might have been wind, or might have been the forest itself breathing with me, mocking me, trapping me in the echo of my own voice. I could feel it in my chest, a subtle tightening, a slow, insistent dread. The forest waited. The fog held me, and the canopy above whispered in my voice, asking questions I could never answer, leaving me shivering, alone with regretful fear. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Fog curled between trunks, thick and damp, clinging to my hair, sticking to my clothes. The smell of wet earth rose with each breath, sharp and sweet in the cold air. I moved slowly, boots sinking into soft soil. Leaves whispered underfoot, though there was no wind. Something shifted in the stillness, a subtle motion just beyond my eyes. The trees, they weren't quite as I remembered. A trunk twisted slightly, then straightened when I blinked. A branch arched in a way that felt deliberate, casting shadows like fingers across the fog. I paused, breath misting in front of me. The forest felt alive, watching me. Every glance returned a slightly different scene, as if the trees themselves were breathing, reforming behind my eyes. A shadow stretched across the fog, elongated, impossible. Then it shifted again, bending into shapes that weren't there moments ago. A curve of bark became a hunched figure. A knot in the trunk looked like an eye, blinking. I blinked, and it was gone. The air felt heavy, charged with static. My fingers tingled, hairs standing on end. I could hear a soft hum, deep, vibrating through the fog. Leaves quivered above, though no breeze stirred them. I walked a few steps, careful. The forest changed behind me. Paths I had just followed now led to unfamiliar clearings. A shadowed hollow seemed to stare at me, then stretched and vanished when I dared to focus. Shapes shifted subtly in the mist. A trunk would bend, a root curl upward like a limb, then straighten the next second. I questioned my own eyes. Was the forest moving, or was I slipping inside it? The fog pressed closer, wet against my skin. I could smell damp leaves and decay, sharp under the sweetness of moss. Every footstep echoed softly, though the earth seemed to swallow the sound. I stopped and looked around. A cluster of trees seemed to lean inward, forming an arch that hadn't been there before. Within the arch, a shadow crouched, then stretched tall and thin, dissolving into mist as I blinked. The forest shifted again. A shape that resembled a figure stood at the edge of my vision. It moved when I turned my head, always just out of focus. I thought I glimpsed eyes, but the fog blurred them, turning solid shapes into ghostly illusions. A low hum vibrated through the ground. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make the hairs on my arms rise. The fog trembled with it, curling around my ankles like the fingers of some quiet, unseen hand. I tried to step forward, but the forest resisted, paths twisting, reshaping beneath my feet. Every glance backward revealed a trail I didn't recognize. Trees realigned, trunks stretched, branches arched. The shapes began to feel purposeful. A hollow in the fog suggested a figure kneeling. Another trunk appeared as if a sentinel stood, watching, waiting. I couldn't be sure if I was seeing reality or some mirrored version of the forest that bent to my fear. Static prickled along my skin. Breath shallow. Chest tight. I sensed movement at the corner of my eyes. A shadow stretched across the fog, then split in two, gliding along the ground, then melting back into the mist. I turned in a slow circle. Every angle brought a different forest. Familiar trees were missing. New trunks rose where none had been. Roots snaked over the soil in intricate, unnatural patterns. A figure-like shadow flickered. Not solid, but not completely gone either. It seemed curious, watching, and I felt the pull of its gaze even though it was only fog and light, only shape and shadow. The forest was changing with me. Every glance shifted reality. Every blink altered the scene. And I realized I was no longer simply walking through it. The forest had become an extension of my own perception, its shapes bending, folding, twisting into forms I could not name or remember. I stopped, heart thudding softly. The fog settled around me like a blanket, silent but alive. A shadow stretched from one tree, then another, forming impossible patterns. And yet, I could not look away. A part of me wanted to follow, to see what the next shift would bring. The shapes lingered, never solid, never fully gone, hovering between fear and fascination. The forest watched, breathing quietly around me, and I felt that uneasy wonder sink deep into my chest, a whisper of curiosity, tinged with the sharp edge of dread. The mist closed around me, trees bending and swaying, shapes shifting in silence, and I took a careful, trembling step forward into a forest that would never be the same the moment I looked away. Fog pressed against my skin, cold and damp, slipping into the cuffs of my jacket, wrapping around my ankles with each step. The forest was still, yet heavy, alive with tension I couldn't name. I paused, breath caught in my chest. The mist shifted in the pale moonlight, casting shadows that moved in their own rhythm. Something was near. Then it came. A howl, piercing, raw, but silent. I felt it vibrate through the air, through my chest, into my bones. No sound reached my ears, yet every fiber of me knew it was there. I shivered. Cold fog clung to my hair. The scent of damp pine filled my nose, mixed with the sharp tang of metal in the soil. I could hear the soft rustling of leaves, but beneath it, something larger circled, unseen, deliberate. I turned slowly. Nothing, just fog curling around the trunks of trees, branches bending, almost as if alive. The vibration hummed in the air, like the forest itself was holding its breath. A shadow flickered at the edge of vision, gone when I blinked. Something was watching, moving in rhythm with my steps, always just out of reach. The fog thickened, smothering familiar shapes. My heart slowed, then quickened. The ground beneath my boots seemed softer, like I was walking on moss that absorbed sound. Each step echoed inside me, yet vanished instantly into the silent void. The forest hummed, or maybe it was my own chest, thudding in tune with the unseen presence. I could feel the pull, like gravity bending toward a shadow I could not see. The howl came again, rippling through the fog like waves. No mouth moved, no creature revealed. I could only feel it, pressing against my skin, against my lungs, a vibration of dread that made my teeth ache. I tried to breathe slowly. The air was thick, damp, tinged with decay and the faint, sweet smell of wet fur. Each inhale brought a tingle along my arms, a static prickling that wasn't electricity, but anticipation. I moved cautiously, feet light, senses stretched. The forest seemed endless, and yet the pull stayed with me. Soft footsteps, a whisper of movement circling my boots, impossible to tell. The howl, its shifted tone, subtle, like a breeze bending over water. I felt its pressure change, then fade, leaving the fog heavy and still, but never truly silent. I stopped again. Every instinct screamed to run, but the forest held me in place, folding paths behind me into mist. The vibration lingered, a weight that pressed on my chest, making each breath shallow. Shadows stretched and shifted in the fog, stretching longer, darker. Something passed behind a tree, gone before I could focus. I realized it had been moving with me all along, circling, patient, unseen. The air felt electric. I could taste it, sharp and cold, metallic on my tongue. The ground underfoot vibrated faintly, like it shared the creature's pulse. I was aware of every leaf, every branch, every movement of fog, and every absence of sound. Another wave of silent howl. It pressed into me, deeper this time, like the forest itself exhaled through unseen lungs. I wanted to run, to escape, but the fog had no edges. It wrapped around me, a soft prison of pale, moving gray. I turned slowly, again and again, always empty space, always fog. Yet I knew it was there, circling, patient, waiting. The vibration lingered after the howl faded, like echoes trapped in the mist. I could feel the forest watching, feeling me as I felt it, a rhythm shared, but never revealed. I stepped forward cautiously, soft footsteps swallowed by fog. The silent howl had vanished for now, but the dread remained, threading through my veins, a quiet pulse beneath the hum of unseen life. The forest was endless, the fog thick and unyielding, and I walked, aware that every step drew me further into its waiting embrace, while the unseen presence circled, patient, silent, relentless. Fog hugged the trees like a shroud, wet and cold, slipping along my sleeves. Night pressed down, heavy, still, the kind of silence that hums beneath your skin. I inhaled. A pause. The air felt mirrored, a slow, deliberate exhale, as if someone else was breathing right behind me, matching every rise and fall of my chest. My footsteps were soft against moss and fallen leaves. Yet the forest felt crowded, even when my eyes met nothing. A shadow drifted past a tree, gone the instant I blinked. Every breath I took felt wrong. Thicker, heavier, carrying a weight I could not see, yet it pressed relentless against my shoulders. I could feel it, following, always close, closer than air should allow. The fog curled around my ankles. It smelled damp, earthy, but tinged with metallic hint, like blood left out in the rain. Each inhale pulled it deeper, into my lungs, into the rhythm of my mirrored breaths. I stopped. The wind stilled. The forest seemed to hold itself, waiting, trembling softly with anticipation. A faint rustle, like cloth brushing over bark, shifted to my right, gone when I turned. The presence, it wasn't shadow or shape. It was weight, heavy and patient, pushing without touch, pressing without form. I felt my pulse in my throat, my skin tingling, small hairs raising against the fog. Even my own heartbeat sounded strange, echoing, repeated in unseen lungs beside me. I moved again, feet careful, deliberate, touching soft moss, brittle leaves. Every step answered by the forest, echoed by something unseen. The fog parted just enough to show glimpses, twisted trunks, glistening bark, but no figure followed. Yet I could feel it there. A slow inhale, a pause, the mirrored exhale. I could feel it match my chest expansion, pressing, patient, breathing just behind, close in the shadow should be. The air thickened. I could smell it now, warm, musky, heavy with something alive. The fog swirled, hiding shapes that might have been my imagination, hiding the source of the pressing weight. I tried to step lightly, but each movement seemed amplified, felt across the fog as if it was waiting, learning. I froze. The forest held its own breath with me. A distant branch cracked, too deliberate, too slow, and the mirrored breathing quickened. I felt it shift, leaning closer. The ground beneath my boots felt unreal, softened by mist, but also solid, heavy, as if the earth itself pressed toward me. The mirrored breast brushed my neck, scented faintly of iron and wet fur. My own exhale caught in my throat, as though swallowed by the presence. I whispered a name, but the sound was gone before it left my lips. Only the fog answered, curling into itself, humming with weight. I tried moving again. Steps careful, deliberate, soft footsteps swallowed immediately by the mist. The mirrored breathing stayed, a constant reminder of unseen proximity. Closer, it pressed, tightening around my chest, a silent demand, a weight I could neither see nor escape. I stopped again. Cold seeped through my jacket, through my spine, spreading to the tips of my fingers. The presence lingered, still, patient, matching every breath, breathing with me, against me. I could not tell where I ended and it began. Fog swirled around my knees, smell of damp earth and metallic tang in the air, and I realized I was alone, yet not. The unseen pressed near, closer to my own skin, and I had no one to call to, no shape to see, no escape. Each breath I drew was no longer my own. It belonged to both of us, and the fog held the secret of presence, humming, waiting, patient. As I moved forward, trapped in the weight of unseen lungs, alone, but never untouched. The fire had almost died. Pale embers glowed weakly, casting trembling light across damp earth. I sat close, feeling its warmth fade with each shallow breath. Smoke curled slowly, stinging my eyes, smelling of char and cold ash. The forest pressed near, silent, patient, watching in the dark spaces between trees. Shadows began to gather, thin at first, then stretching, sliding closer along the fog ground. I could hear them, soft rustling, like cloth brushing against bark, but heavier, deliberate. They circled me, careful, moving without a sound that should belong to motion. The fire's heat dwindled further, fingers of cold climbing my spine. I pulled my coat tighter, felt the damp press into my clothes. Breath met mist, exhaling slowly, matching the slow rhythm of the shadow's approach. Every glance caught movement, shapes bending and merging in corners of vision. The shadows paused, waiting, watching, silent but alive, hunger contained in quiet patience. I tried to stand, but the cold was heavier than wood and moss. It seeped into my knees, my hands, until every movement felt reluctant, as if the forest itself were pressing me down. The embers flickered, and the shadows leaned closer, leaning into light and dark at once. Edges blurred, forms stretching, breathing with a weight I could feel. Even without sound, I lay back, the last warmth slipping from my body, leaving the chill to claim me. The forest hummed softly, a static that vibrated under my skin, curling into every joint and tendon. The circling shadows no longer startled me. I could sense them, their weight, their presence. And yet they were not here to harm, only to observe, to accompany, to witness the fading of the fire. The embers sank lower, tiny sparks dying, and the cold embraced every inch of me. Silence thickened, a palpable thing that pressed on my chest, settling into my bones. I felt the fog curling around the fire, threading into my hair, sliding across my skin. The shadows moved within it, gliding without form, indistinct, yet infinitely close. I exhaled slowly, letting the cold enter fully. The fire's light disappeared, and the shadows melded seamlessly with the fog, no longer circling, simply there, still, watching in the quiet darkness. The forest was complete. I was alone, and yet not alone. The chill, the fog, the lingering weight of unseen presence, they were enough. My heart slowed. The tension melted into a strange acceptance, a calm that came not from comfort, but from knowing I could do nothing else. Breath after breath, I let the cold settle into my lungs. The fog drifted across my face, soft as silk, still as a forgotten dream. I felt every shadow merge with the darkness, every whisper swallowed by silence. The fire was gone. Warmth was gone. The night held me in its quiet arms, and I no longer struggled. Shadows pressed close, but not threatening. They merely were. I breathed in rhythm with them, slow, deliberate, matching the fog, the silence, the forest itself. I closed my eyes. Cold seeped into every corner of my body, but the fear had dulled. The night had claimed the fire, the warmth, and all that remained was stillness. Quiet acceptance, alone yet observed, cold, yet safe within the dark's embrace. The forest exhaled, and I exhaled with it. The trees thinned, mist thickened, fog rolled over the ground, pale and endless. I stepped forward, feet sinking slightly into cold, damp earth. The forest ended, or maybe it just let go of me. Air was heavy, still, yet vibrating softly, like the pulse of something unseen. The scent of wet pine and distant smoke lingered, but now it was mingled with something sweeter, something alien, floating just beyond understanding. Shapes moved in the haze, edges blurred, figures hovering just beyond perception. I could not see them clearly, yet I felt their attention, a subtle tug on my skin, on my thoughts. I held my breath. A faint rustling brushed past my ear, soft, careful, deliberate. The fog shifted with it, curling around my hands, pressing against my face. Every step forward felt predetermined. The mist formed itself around me, paths appearing and vanishing in the blink of an eye. Shadows, or maybe figures, glimmered at the corners of sight, then faded when I tried to focus. I realized I had left the world I knew. The trees, the soil, the quiet rustle of night, all replaced by this blank expanse. Silence stretched and wrapped around me, but it was not empty. It hummed, low and steady, a vibration I could feel in my bones. The hovering forms beckoned, not with motion, but with intent. I felt pulled toward them, a curious ache that was neither fear nor comfort. Their presence was constant, filling the air with a strange expectation. The fog pressed in closer. It was cold, yet soft against my skin, like silk brushing damp hair. Each inhale tasted of mist and something faintly metallic, something impossible to name. I walked slowly, footsteps muffled, swallowed by the endless gray. The shapes shifted with every blink, sometimes closer, sometimes slipping away, just beyond touch, just beyond comprehension. I wondered if I would leave, if there was a path back to warmth, to light, to known air. But the fog had erased everything familiar. Even my own shadow dissolved, replaced by the pale, endless gray. A whisper seemed to travel through the mist, soft, almost internal. Not words, but thought echoes, shapes of questions I could not answer. I realized it was not meant to speak, only to observe, only to draw me forward. I paused. The fog thickened, and for the first time, I felt entirely seen. Figures hovered nearer, breathless, suspended in the gray. I could sense their forms, but the eyes, the dead eyes, remained hidden. A strange wonder rose within me. Not excitement, not fear exactly. Something between awe and isolation. I understood this place had no edges, no limits, no return. And yet, I was not alone. The hovering figures, the endless fog, the weight of the air, they were companions, silent guides, shaping the mist around me. The fog shifted again. Figures glimmered, then faded. And I realized, in this endless gray, I could linger, forever moving, forever wandering, forever watched. I exhaled slowly. The cold entered fully, slipping into my chest, settling into the hollow spaces beneath skin and bone. The fog wrapped tighter, soft, constant, infinite. The forest behind me was gone. There was only mist, shapes, and the endless gray stretching forward. I stepped further, footsteps silent, breath mirrored by the fog itself. And I understood I may never leave. And yet I was not afraid. I was alone, but awed, curious in a way the world above could never offer. The mist held me, and I let it, moving forward into its quiet, suspended wonder. The figures lingered just beyond sight, watching, waiting, and the fog welcomed me fully. I walked deeper, alone, endlessly, and the fog exhaled with me.